Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take that stack of sources you sent over and really pull out the essential information.
And today, wow, we're tackling a big one. Ivermectin. Probably one of the most, let's say, contentious topics to come out of the whole COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. Contentious, politicized. For a lot of people, just hearing the name brings up strong feelings.
It really does. It became this kind of symbol, didn't it? About who you trust, science, government, the media.
So our goal here is to try and cut through some of that noise. We're going to follow the journey based on the materials provided.
Exactly. From those very first, hopeful-seeming lab findings, then the warnings from health bodies, the whole misinformation explosion.
And finally, where the actual rigorous science landed, looking at clinical trials right up to data from April 2024.
But first, maybe let's just quickly ground ourselves. What is ivermectin normally?
Good point. Before it became famous or infamous, it was just a standard drug.
Right. A well-known antiparasitic, used all over the world for things like river blindness, strongyloidiasis, in people and animals. Nothing controversial about it then.
It had a perfectly respectable career treating parasites.
Until COVID turned it into, well, something else entirely.
Okay, so let's rewind to early 2020. The pandemic's just starting. Scientists are desperate for anything that might work. Why ivermectin? Why look at an anti-parasite drug for a virus?
Well, it came from those early lab screenings. Scientists were testing thousands of existing drugs to see if anything had an effect against SARS-CoV-2 in vitro.
In vitro meaning in a petri dish, basically.
Exactly. In cell cultures, often monkey kidney cells in this case, and ivermectin showed up as having some activity. It seemed to inhibit the virus from replicating in those cells.
And there were numbers attached to that, right? That looked pretty impressive initially.
There were. The sources mentioned an IC50, that's the concentration needed to inhibit the virus by half of about 2.2 to 2.8 micromolar.
Which on paper sounds good.
On paper, yes. But here's the immediate huge problem they ran into: getting that concentration inside a human body.
So the dose needed in the lab dish just wasn't achievable in a person.
Not even close. Not safely, anyway. To get the levels needed to replicate that in vitro effect throughout your system, you'd need doses far, far higher than anything ever approved for human use.
Why? What was the risk?
Well, the thinking was the drug worked by messing with a process in our own cells, inhibiting something called important alpha beta 1, which helps transport things into the cell nucleus.
Okay.
But drugs that target fundamental host cell processes like that often have what's called a narrow therapeutic window.
Meaning the gap between a helpful dose and a harmful dose is really small.
Precisely. You just couldn't flood the body with enough ivermectin to stop the virus without risking serious toxicity, maybe major organ damage. So right from the get-go, the basic science suggested it wasn't viable.
The lab result was real, but translating it to a patient was, practically speaking, impossible from a safety standpoint.
That's the crux of it, yes.
Okay, so the fundamental science had this massive hurdle, but that message clearly didn't get through or got drowned out. What did the official health organizations say?
They were pretty much unanimous, quite quick about it. You had the World Health Organization, the WHO,
right,
the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, here in the U.S., the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Infectious Diseases Society of America, the IDSA.
What was their advice?
Consistent across the board. Do not use ivermectin for COVID-19 outside of a properly conducted clinical trial, period.
And didn't the company that makes ivermectin also weigh in? Which seems unusual.
It is unusual. Merck, who originally developed the drug, put out a statement, I think it was February 2021, basically saying, look, there's no good scientific evidence it works for COVID, and frankly, using it off-label could be dangerous.
So warnings from global health bodies, warnings from the manufacturer, and yet
it exploded online. It became this huge phenomenon.
How did that happen? How does a drug with shaky scientific backing and official warnings against its use become this cause?
Well, it got picked up and amplified. Online campaigns, advocacy groups. It somehow transformed from just a drug into a political symbol.
A symbol of what?
For some, it was the suppressed cure. It got championed by anti-vaccine movements, by people deep into conspiracy theories, claiming it was being hidden by, big pharma or the government.
And this led to people getting desperate, trying to get it in any way they could.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where things got genuinely dangerous. People couldn't get prescriptions easily, so they turned to veterinary versions.
You mean like the stuff for horses?
Exactly. The sources talk about people using horse dewormer paste. It even caused shortages for actual animal use.
Wow.
And worse. There was a case mentioned where someone drank an injectable form meant for cattle and ended up hospitalized. Poison Control Center saw a big jump in calls related to ivermectin in 2021. The CDC even issued a health alert about it.
Which then led to that FDA tweet, probably the most famous tweet of the pandemic.
Has to be up there. August 2021. Just, you are not a horse. You are not a cow. Seriously, y'all, stop it.
Short, punchy, definitely went viral, but it also led to legal trouble.
It did. A group of doctors who were prescribing ivermectin actually sued the FDA over posts like that one.
And what happened?
Well, in 2023, a court ruled that the FDA, by posting things like the horse tweet, had kind of overstepped its authority, that it sounded too much like giving medical advice, which isn't their specific job.
So they had to take the tweet down.
They did remove those specific social media posts earlier this year, March 2024. But, and this is crucial, the FDA immediately said, okay, the posts are gone, but our scientific position hasn't changed one bit. The data still doesn't support using ivermectin for COVID.
Interesting distinction. Meanwhile, while the U.S. was dealing with tweets and lawsuits, some other countries were actually allowing it.
Yeah, for a while. We saw some governments, particularly in parts of Latin America, also India, South Africa, the Czech Republic, they briefly authorized or even promoted off-label use.
Based on what?
Often based on anecdotes or maybe early preprint studies that hadn't been peer-reviewed yet and later turned out to be flawed.
And did those authorizations stick?
Not always. As better data came in, and as some of the initial studies were revealed to be problematic, several places like Peru and India reversed course and stopped recommending it. Okay, so to really understand why this ivermectin idea had such staying power, despite all the official advice, we need to look under the hood of the research itself. The studies that claimed it worked.
Right, because there were studies published showing positive results initially.
There were, but the problem was a significant number of them were, well, they were bad, really bad.
Bad in what way? Like small sample sizes, methodological issues, things that happen in science sometimes.
It went way beyond typical limitations. We're talking serious errors, data that couldn't be verified, and in some quite high-profile cases, outright fraud, intentional manipulation of data.
Fraud, that's a very strong word in science. Are the sources clear this wasn't just mistakes?
Unfortunately, yes. There's the example of the El Ghazar study from Egypt. It got a lot of attention early on.
Okay.
Later retracted. Why? Concerns about plagiarism, duplicated patient data, and get this, patient deaths recorded on dates before the study supposedly even started.
Oh, wow. That's blatant.
It is. And it wasn't the only one. Other analyses found studies retracted for similar reasons. Duplicated data, ethical red flags. It seems some results were just fabricated to look positive.
That's deeply worrying. What kind of impact did these fraudulent studies have on the overall picture? Did they significantly skew the results?
Massively.
Yeah.
There's a really telling example. One research group did a meta-analysis, pooling data from many studies.
Right.
Their initial calculation, including some of these later retracted or highly suspicious studies, found that ivermectin led to a huge 51% increase in survival.
51%? I mean, no wonder people were excited. That sounds incredible.
Absolutely. A miracle cure number. But then they redid the analysis. They took out the studies identified as being potentially fraudulent or having serious unexplainable flaws.
That amazing 51% survival benefit. It just evaporated. It dropped to a 4% increase, which wasn't statistically significant at all. It meant nothing.
So the entire miracle cure narrative was essentially propped up by garbage data.
In large part, yes. Compromised, potentially fraudulent data made it look like a lifesaver when the reliable data showed little to no effect on survival. It's a stark lesson in research integrity.
And the researchers who tried to point this out, who flagged the bad studies or corrected their own analyses, like Dr. Andrew Hill,
they faced an absolute storm. The sources mentioned severe online harassment, threats, even death threats, coffin photos sent to them.
just for doing careful science.
Yes, because the issue had become so incredibly politicized. Questioning the ivermectin data wasn't seen as scientific scrutiny. It was seen by advocates as actively trying to suppress this supposed cure. It was a toxic environment. Okay, so we've navigated the early hype, the regulatory warnings, the really concerning issue of fraud in some studies. Let's fast forward. Science kept working, right? Bigger, better trials were done. What's the final verdict now, based on the comprehensive data up to 2024?
The final verdict, looking at large-scale systematic reviews and meta-analyses, we're talking 33 studies, over 15,000 participants as of April 2024, is pretty clear on the most important things.
Which are?
The critical outcomes. Does it stop people from dying? Does it keep them out of the ICU, off ventilators? Does it prevent hospitalization?
And the answer is?
No. The high-quality evidence shows ivermectin has no statistically significant impact on all-cause mortality.
None.
None. No significant effect on the need for mechanical ventilation, though there was maybe a tiny, non-significant trend there.
Yep.
No significant difference in ICU admissions or hospitalization rates.
Didn't help clear the virus faster either, like PCR tests turning negative?
Nope. No significant impact on PCR negative conversion rates either. So, on all the key measures of preventing severe disease or death, the reliable data says it doesn't work.
But wasn't there something, I feel like I remember reading about symptom relief.
Ah, yes. That's the one bit of nuance. The data did show a statistically significant, though modest, effect on symptoms.
How so?
It seemed to slightly decrease the time it took for all symptoms to go away and slightly improve sustained symptom relief.
Okay, so it might help someone with a mild case feel better a bit sooner.
That seems to be what the evidence suggests, yes. But it doesn't stop the disease from getting worse. It doesn't prevent severe outcomes. It's not a cure or even a treatment for serious COVID.
What about safety in these big trials, when used properly?
Generally, at the correct doses used in the trials, the rates of adverse events, side effects were similar between the ivermectin groups and the placebo or control groups. It seemed reasonably well tolerated at therapeutic doses.
Any specific factors that made side effects more likely?
Interestingly, yes. The analysis found that being older or having diabetes made people generally more likely to experience adverse events in these trials. But those factors didn't predict worse outcomes, like mortality from COVID itself. So, age and diabetes seemed linked more to side effects than to whether the drug worked or not against the virus's severe effects.
And just to be crystal clear, let's contrast ivermectin with something like Paxlovid, which is an authorized antiviral.
Right. Very important distinction. Paxlovid from Pfizer is a completely different beast. It's a protease inhibitor, specifically designed to target a key enzyme the SARS-CoV-2 virus needs to replicate.
So not just repurposed ivermectin, despite the conspiracy theories.
Absolutely not. That claim is completely false. Paxlovid is a purpose-built antiviral combination therapy. It works differently, and unlike ivermectin, high-quality trials have shown it is effective at reducing the risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and death in high-risk patients.
Different drug, different mechanism, different results.
Exactly. Proven efficacy versus lack of efficacy on critical outcomes.
So, looking back at this whole ivermectin saga through the lens of these sources, it's quite a story.
It really is. It's a powerful case study, isn't it?
Yeah.
It shows how fast things can move from a tiny lab signal.
Which needs immediate critical thinking about real-world application, like the dosage issue.
Right. And then it shows the destructive potential of misinformation, especially when it taps into fear, desperation, and distrust.
And it forced the scientific community to confront weaknesses in its own systems.
And definitely. The sheer scale of the research integrity problems, the fraud, it was a wake-up call. Researchers realized that the standard tools they use to assess study quality, like the Cochrane Risk of Bias tool, just weren't designed to catch deliberate fabrication.
They assumed a baseline level of honesty that wasn't always there.
Exactly, which led to calls for much stricter transparency, like demanding that researchers share their raw, patient-level data so others can verify the findings.
Because if you can't trust the data, you can't trust the conclusions. And we saw the real-world consequences of trusting flawed data here: confusion, dangerous self-treatment.
It really undermined public trust at a critical time. Which brings us to the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Given that the established methods for checking scientific quality kind of failed us in the face of intentional fraud during the ivermectin craze,
what bigger, more fundamental changes might still be needed? How do we ensure that the scientific process is robust and transparent enough to earn and maintain public trust during the next global health crisis? What systemic changes are essential so we're not just assuming trust, but truly guaranteeing it?
Something important to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.